Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Justice. I'm an associate with Samfiru Tumarkin, working out of their Toronto office. And I'm joining you here again today to answer as many of your employment law related questions as possible. I'm someone who specializes in representing both employees and employers when it comes to workplace issues, whether it's before the workplace or the work relationship starts, rather, during it or after as well. I will hopefully answer as many questions as possible, so please do send them in. For those of you who may not want to ask a question in this capacity, feel free to reach out to us directly. Our website's www.stlawyers.ca. But before I get into some of the questions, I did want to touch on something that is very topical. I think as of today, actually, there was an announcement from the province, Ontario, and the announcement was that proof of vaccination, so the idea of a vaccine passport or certificate, this proof will be required to access non-essential businesses in Ontario, so gyms, restaurants, movie theaters, concert halls, and that this is supposed to start actually September the 22nd. However, in saying that, I want to be clear, the certificate or the passport or whatever you want to call it will not be required when it comes to retail shopping, banks, essential services, outdoor patios, and workplaces. So just because we've got this news and just because there is going to be a requirement to prove you've been vaccinated in some capacities, at the moment in the province of Ontario, this does not apply to workplaces. So I'm sure there might be a lot of questions coming in about vaccine passports, proof of vaccination, but just know that if you're someone working in Ontario for a provincially regulated employer, and your employer asks you to get the vaccine or asks about information from you relating to the vaccine, just know that even though there are these vaccine passports coming out, that you do still have options and that the employer cannot force you to be vaccinated until there's actually a government mandate in place. So again, if your job is being threatened or you're potentially being faced with punishment if you don't disclose certain information or you don't get vaccinated in your workplace, just know that as of now, there is still no government mandate for that to happen when it comes to provincially regulated companies within the province. So having said that, I will get into some questions and maybe I'll touch a bit more on the vaccine passports and that kind of thing later on. So the first question or comment I've got here comes from Bonnie from Facebook. And Bonnie says that she works at Chartwell. She'll be let go October 12th on a LOA, which I take to mean a leave of absence without pay. And Bonnie further says that they will not fire her. So I might need a bit more information, Bonnie, but it could be the case that what you're describing is a situation where, like many are facing right now, an employer is asking for you to be vaccinated or to provide proof of your vaccination by a certain day. And if you don't provide that proof or don't give the employer what it is they're asking for, that you either might be terminated or, Bonnie, in your case, I guess, put on a leave of absence. And there are a lot of companies who are placing individuals on unpaid leaves of absence in cases where the individual refuses to provide proof of vaccination. And just like a termination at the moment, that's not acceptable. So if you're being placed on an unpaid leave without your consent, and it has to do with being vaccinated or not, you very likely have options. You could be entitled not only to potential severance entitlements, but also additional damages should there be any discrimination against you. So hopefully that answers your question or deals with your concern, Bonnie. But again, if you have any further questions, feel free to contact us directly. Now, Henry's got another question from Facebook. Henry's asking, how do seniors without phones show the certificate? And by that, I assume you mean the vaccination certificate. So that's a good question. Offhand, I don't know specifically all the ways in which the certificate can be sort of accomplished. I know that, of course, there is through the phone. I know that the province is looking for you to combine your driver's license or some sort of identification with the certificate. I would imagine there's going to be some sort of hard copy version of it available to those who maybe aren't with a phone capable of that. So I would just say at the moment, stay tuned. I know there's going to be a lot more details coming out probably in the coming weeks, because this is going to take place or take effect in a few weeks from now. So I'm sure that'll be something raised, and hopefully that'll give you some clarity there. I've got another question coming from Kevin from Facebook. Kevin's asking, should I disclose my disability to a potential employer before or after the interview? Can I request to work from home? I have a walking issue, and this is an office position. So I guess the question would be whether and to what extent you can perform the job at home. If that's a possibility, then that may be something that you should inquire about. If there's some resistance on the employer's end in terms of a work from home arrangement, it may be at that time that you can mention not necessarily everything about your disability, but just that you require some accommodation, and maybe let the employer know what limitations or restrictions you have in terms of that accommodation, and go from there. Because generally there is an obligation to accommodate, but of course this is assuming you have the job as well. So I would start with that in any event, and see where that takes you. And again, if you need any further help, feel free to reach out to our firm. I've got another question coming in from Virginie on Facebook saying, isn't that against the Canadian Constitution? And so I think what you might be referring to is either the vaccine passport or perhaps just an employer demanding or insisting that you get vaccinated in order to work. I will say, with respect to the second situation I mentioned, again, if an employer is insisting you go to work only if you're vaccinated, there are definitely human rights concerns there. So at the very least, it could be a human rights violation. Again, not to mention that you might be owed severance if they're not wanting you to come back or not able to accommodate you. If we're talking about the vaccine passport and sort of whether it's a constitutional infringement, just FYI, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I do know that certain freedoms that we have in the society are also kind of balanced with other factors. And I guess my guess on that would be that the government ultimately deemed it to be fine to institute vaccine passports in light of we'll say the safety element. But that necessarily isn't a question I'm the best to answer, but I can definitely speak in the employment context. So if you're being forced, again, in a situation where you have to be vaccinated or else you lose your job, then again, there are severance and as well potential human rights violations there. I've got another question from Natasha. Natasha's asking, if you work within a unionized environment, should you seek legal counsel? So another disclaimer, I don't specialize in unionized employment. You would have presumably a union representative who hopefully should advocate on your behalf when it comes to your union. There would be a collective bargaining agreement as well that would set out how those sorts of things work. So I would say that if you're in a unionized environment and you've got an employment issue, definitely first look at your collective bargaining agreement, consult with your union rep, and they should hopefully be the person that can help you out with that situation. I've got another question from Mara on Facebook. Mara is saying she works at Queen's University Kingston Health Science Center, and as of September 7th, she won't be allowed to enter the institution without proof of vaccine or consent to testing. Mara mentions not consenting to testing. She's contacted her union, and they've indicated it's possible that employees may face unpaid leave or termination at some point. And Mar asks if there's any legal recourse. So again, this seems to be a unionized matter. So what I can say is more so in the non-unionized context. But as I said earlier, if you're being denied access to the building without a vaccine, I guess the first question would be, is there some alternate arrangement that can be worked out, whether you can work from home or not? So that might be something to canvass. But if they're saying that you can either get vaccinated or consent to testing, and you choose neither, that could potentially be a problem in the sense, not so much about the vaccine, but if the employer is saying as an alternative that you'll have to do some testing, depending on how invasive the testing is, again, as an alternative to being vaccinated, that may be a middle ground that the law would say is acceptable. There isn't too much case law on the issue of rapid COVID testing. There is one unionized matter that I'm aware of where a court found that nasal swabs on occasion were an acceptable form of testing, although this was in the context of an employer with a lot of vulnerable individuals. And so that may very well be the Health Science Center too. So I can't say if you're going to reject both the vaccine and the testing that you'll have as many options, but I would still say definitely to get in touch with your union rep, express your concerns to them, figure out how invasive this testing is, and take it from there. I've got some other questions coming in. Jody from Facebook asks, if you refuse to be vaccinated and are placed on an unpaid leave, is there a general thought that EI benefits would be available? And that's potentially the case. Again, we're sort of entering uncharted territory here. So, the question is, do you qualify for EI benefits if you don't want to get vaccinated? And I guess that could come down to the reasons for which you don't want to get vaccinated. For example, if you have a medical condition and you can't get vaccinated for that reason, well, first of all, if you're placed on an unpaid leave of absence, you might be owed severance, and you could argue that actually your employment was terminated as soon as you were placed on an unpaid leave. And if that were the case, then you could get EI benefits. So depending on the circumstances specifically, again, if you're being forced to go back to work only if you're vaccinated, or otherwise you won't earn a living anymore with that company, or at least, while you're on leave, then that could be a termination, just like a regular termination could be a termination. And that would arguably entitle you to EI. So at the very least, if you're in that kind of a situation, I would definitely apply for EI, explain to EI if necessary what the situation involves. And I find that a lot of times EI can be fairly flexible in terms of what they provide. So I would suggest that. But again, if you are in that situation and placed on an unpaid leave without any end in sight, definitely contact our firm, because I think that we may be of great help for you there. But thank you again for your question. I've got another question coming in from Mark. Apologies for those that I don't answer. There's just a lot coming in. Mark on YouTube asks, if I'm unvaccinated, is my employer allowed to ask about my activities outside of work to determine if I'm a risk of exposure? And I would say, generally speaking, no. There's certain information that employers can ask about in terms of whether and to what extent they can accommodate you at work. But that doesn't give them free rein to ask about what activities you're engaging in, because first of all, even if you did disclose those activities, there's really no way of being able to quantify how much greater of a risk you are. So for them to ask the question probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And certainly if they were to punish you for answering a question like that, or punish you for not answering a question like that, then I'm not sure there's really a rational basis for them doing so. And that might also be a situation that you want to get in touch with us, because you may have options in the form of severance or other options. So thanks though for your question, Mark. I've got another question coming in from Anne-Marie, from Facebook. Anne-Marie asks, what is the recourse if a notarized religious exemption is denied? My VP threatened today with a big if it is accepted. So I take from what you're saying to mean that if you've got, let's say, a document from a religious leader within your community who can testify as to your faith and speak to, let's say, your contributions in the religious community, and just confirm that you are a believer in that religion, and that's the basis for why you are requesting an exemption for the vaccine, then you, I think, have options, because religion is technically a ground that's protected under human rights legislation. Now, it may come down to what the specific religion is, not to say that all religions will be recognized equally, but I think if you do have a document that substantiates the religious belief and provides a basis for why you don't want to get vaccinated, and because that is a protected ground under human rights legislation, I think that you could have a strong case if your employment is terminated after that, if the company doesn't accept the reason, or, for example, if the company places you on an unpaid leave of absence without your consent. So if there's some sort of retaliation or punishment, I suppose, in response to that exemption, I think the company is definitely opening itself up to being liable to paying you severance, potentially, as well as arguably human rights damages for the religious grounds. So if all of that is what you're doing and you're still facing resistance, again, by all means, get in touch with our firm and we can take it from there. I've got another question from Natalie. Natalie on Facebook asks, my company is changing their policy regarding being vaccinated. I've been there 34 years and I've been told in order to be employed, I must comply. And depending on if it's legal and I'm treated differently from the vaccination, what can I do? Yeah, again, this is a central theme nowadays. So I take it to mean that they've changed the policy. They're requiring you to be vaccinated. And if you don't comply, that you might face differential treatment. So again, I was saying before, if your employer is insisting that you get vaccinated, unless you're part of a very, very small exception, most industries in the province are not, most companies that work in the province, I should say, provincially regulated ones, they don't have the inherent authority to demand that you get vaccinated. They've got to accommodate you, and if you're being treated differently based on being unvaccinated, you could also argue that that is sort of a perceived disability. A lot of people come to me and they say, Chris, I don't have a medical exemption from a vaccine. I don't necessarily believe in a certain religion that exempts me from a vaccine, but I'm nonetheless hesitant to get vaccinated, for example, because of, say, there being risks or the science not being airtight, or just because I think it's invasive. And, that's your rationale. I'm not going to lie and say that it's going to be as easy for you as someone with a medical condition to ask for an exemption. But if that is your basis for refusing the vaccine and you are being treated differently for that reason, in a way, you could be seen as having a disability by your employer. And that could arguably as well be something protected under human rights legislation. So even in that case, if you fear that something bad is going to come down the line after you don't do this or don't do that regarding vaccines, and that's your reasoning, then I would still say get in touch with us if that happens. Yeah, we can definitely take it from there. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry, just looking at some other questions here. Seems like I've answered most of them. What I was going to say as well, just going back to my earlier point about what, the hot topic being vaccines and everything, I wanted to touch also on COVID layoffs. It's not maybe as hot of a topic right now as vaccines or vaccine passports are, but I just wanted to make a point about COVID layoffs because I know that there are a number of people who are still laid off and may very well have been laid off since March of last year that may be wondering, what's going on? Am I entitled to severance? Am I ever going to be called back? What are my options? And part of the issue with waiting so long, let's say you've been laid off for 17, 18 months and then consulting with a lawyer, is that time that passes, you could be viewed or deemed to have accepted the layoff. So if you have concerns about your layoff being longer than you think it is, maybe it just started, maybe it's been going on for a while, I would say it's probably in your better interest to to consult with a lawyer sooner rather than later, because you just don't want there to be a significant amount of time passing, and then for whatever reason you're going to be viewed as accepting the layoff, which could pose a problem down the road. So if anyone is on a layoff, wondering what's going on, I think it's always good to get some advice, because it may be much more beneficial for you to take action sooner than later. Just because you're laid off does not mean that you're not entitled to severance. It does not mean that the company can lay you off, even if they are citing, the infectious disease emergency leave or citing COVID. It still does not necessarily mean they can lay you off without your consent. And so just know that you very well may have options, and that if you don't want to be in that employment situation any longer, you could potentially get a significant amount of severance on top of potentially other compensation. So just wanted to make that point in case anyone was in doubt or wondering what was going on in their particular situation. Got some more questions coming in from Razor Sharp on YouTube. Razor Sharp asks, can an employer put you on reduced pay or hours as a result of your vaccination status? And general answer to that is no. If just like a termination, just like an unpaid leave of absence, if the employer is significantly changing the terms of your employment, whether it's pay related, hours related, your job title, whatever it is, if the employer is imposing significant changes, and it has to do with not disclosing your vaccination status, then that is not acceptable. And that could on itself trigger a constructive dismissal. And that would entitle you to the same entitlements as would a termination. And so, as an employee as well, if you're being approached by your employer and you're being told that you're not losing your job, but they're going to reduce your hours, and you're thinking whether you should accept that, just know that if you accept that, and there's no end date as far as when that reduction is going to last, unless it lasts forever, then that could easily form the new terms of your employment. And you may not, as an employee, be able to go back to how things were, be able to go back to normal pay, normal hours. So the longer that, again, you accept an arrangement like that, and as more and more time passes, you're going to be seen as, in a way, condoning that reduction. Just like if you're on a layoff for a huge amount of time, there's a risk. So I would say if that's happening, Razor, consult with a lawyer, or definitely object to it if that's not something you're agreeable to, and put that in writing. And that'll kind of put the ball in the company's court, and they'll have to decide whether, they want to reinstate you back to your original hours, whether they don't, which then could trigger termination rights, or whether there's some sort of middle ground. So thanks very much, though, for your question. I've got another question here coming in from, again, I think Virginie asked one before, but she's asking, is suspending you without pay because you don't get vaccinated legal? And again, the answer to that, generally speaking, is no, in the sense that if you're being placed on a suspension, an unpaid suspension, for that reason, and you don't consent to it, essentially what's happening is you're going from making X amount of dollars every 2 weeks now to making nothing. Or at least maybe you can collect EI or something like that, but otherwise nothing. And so that's a huge change to the terms of your employment again, and that could easily trigger termination rights and potentially further bad faith damages, depending on what was specifically talked about as far as the vaccination and what exemption there might be and that kind of thing between you and the company. So definitely reach out to us if that's happening, if you're being placed on a suspension without pay, especially if it's for an undetermined amount of time. Jody asks, what is the unpaid leave? Does that not have an end date? Are you assuming your job is held until you make a vaccine decision? Yeah, that's a good question. In my experience, and it's just sort of very new, I've had companies approach employees and say, we need you to be vaccinated, let's say by the end of September. And if you're not vaccinated by the end of September, we're going to place you on an unpaid leave of absence, and we're not going to call you back to work until we deem it's safe for you to go back to work. And this is a company telling the employee this. And my response to that is that the company is not fit to, be the decider as to when it's safe to go back. So in a lot of these cases, people who are being placed on unpaid leaves of absences are being placed on them with no end date, or they're being told when this whole COVID thing blows over, which could be a very long time from now, maybe we'll have you come back then. So as an employee, you just simply can't afford to wait around indefinitely in hopes that they call you back, and meanwhile just figure out what you're going to do with your life in the middle of a pandemic. So if you're in that situation again, then absolutely get into contact with us, because it seems like a lot of companies are doing things normally that they wouldn't do, and sort of in response to this unprecedented pandemic. And it may seem like there's some fairness or some rationale behind it, but don't assume that, and definitely like I say, you want to take action or object to something like that, rather than going along with it and having that hurt you later on down the line. I've got another question. So Rachel's asking, from Facebook, can I give my employer a notice of liability that if I don't get an injection and anything happens, they're liable? Is this real? So this is something I've had a bit of experience in terms of clients of mine or potential clients of mine coming to me and saying, can I get the company to sign something saying, all right, I'll get the vaccine, but if I get sick, I want you on the hook. I want you to be liable to some degree. The short answer is good luck trying to get a company to sign something like that. It just will be next to impossible. It won't happen. The problem is that even if you do get sick after getting vaccinated, the question is, did you get sick because you were vaccinated specifically? Did you get sick because of some other external factor? It is very difficult it would be potentially very difficult to determine the exact link between the illness and whether the vaccine contributed to it and to what extent. So even in that sense, practically speaking, it would be very difficult to impose liability on the employer, even if there was an argument to be made there. But in short, I don't think you're going to have much success with getting them to do that. So if knowing that you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to get vaccinated, then hopefully that can at least clarify your decision making. And again, if they punish you for that reason, you could have some significant entitlements that you'll want to talk to a lawyer about. I've got some other questions in here. Kurt from YouTube makes a statement: no one can force a medical procedure on an employee, and you're correct, they can't. Especially if the procedure is more invasive, and the more invasive it is, the less acceptable it is to force something like that. So absolutely right. They can't force you. They can only ask. And if you refuse to do it and they insist, or otherwise they take retributive action, then that's what I'm saying. You have rights and entitlements. I've got another question from Christine on Facebook. Christine's asking, if being mandated by the employer to get vaccinated or submit 3 times a week to testing, do they have to let you do that in company time? So I guess if you don't want to get vaccinated and there's an alternate, which is testing to be done, whether it's once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, my first question is always, how invasive is the testing? What is the process for testing? Is it a nasal swab? Is it a questionnaire? Is it a temperature check? Is it something else? So I guess depending on how long that process is, I don't imagine it would be that lengthy. They could very well just have you come before work and get it done. But I would say if they are asking you to go somewhere else to get tested, I think it is reasonable to have that done on company time. If the company pushes back, then I would say it could be also reasonable to, request some additional form of compensation or consideration if you're doing it on your own time. So if that is a particular issue and they're not letting you do it on company time or during work hours, then I guess it would just come down to how much of an inconvenience is it otherwise to you, and how much of a cost would it be for you. So though, depending on those factors, I would say you might have more or less leverage to insist that it be done at a certain point in time. So I know that's more of a general answer, Christine, but definitely if you want to follow up with us, feel free to reach out directly. Now I've got another question in here. I appreciate, again, everyone's questions. We're coming up on the end of time, but I will answer another question and kind of leave you guys there for the time being. I've got a question from Cheryl. Cheryl saying, I'm a PSW and I'm unable to work. I can't mask. My work made it mandatory in April of last year. I've asked to get a doctor's note. Company put me on medical. What can I do? So if as a result of your inability to wear a mask, you cannot perform your job as a PSW, and I guess it would depend on whether you're vaccinated or not. I don't know if that's something you're open to. I guess the question is, how does the company or your workplace accommodate you? Can they have you do something that doesn't require the use of a mask, but at the same time doesn't expose you to potentially vulnerable individuals? Because places like long-term care homes, residence homes, there's a bit of a difference in terms of how you assess something like that versus another workplace that doesn't have especially vulnerable people around. So I would say, to see if there's an accommodation. If not, and you're being placed on a medical leave of some sort, then I'm hoping that you're getting compensated there. But if you're in a position where you're financially taking a hit and your employer is unable to accommodate you, I guess depending on how reasonable that employer is, I would say definitely get in touch with us, because it seems like we might need a bit more information from you to fully assess it. But hopefully that helps a little bit. Again, I appreciate everyone's questions. I realize I can't answer everything. I do, again, appreciate it all. I'll be back definitely in the future, so look out for me. I thank everyone for your time, for attending today's Q&A. And I just want to direct you to pocketemploymentlawyer.ca. That's something that we provide, a website which will have a lot of general information that touches on a lot of issues that come up very frequently in our line of work. If you have any additional questions as well, please do contact help@employmentlawyer.ca, and we can maybe follow up or answer some of your new questions. And in any event, visit our website, www.stlawyers.ca. Look us up. I work out of Toronto, but we've got offices all over the country. And so for those of you that are outside the province, feel free to touch base with some of our associates in Vancouver, Ottawa, Calgary. But in any event, I'll leave you on that note. I do hope you're all otherwise taking care, and I will be back before you know it. Thanks again, everyone. Take